It looks like Marina just joined us as well. Okay, so welcome everyone. We find ourselves on Kaf Hey Amid Aleph 25a, and we're going to get a breath of fresh air. What do I mean by that? We are finally going to be switching up the topic, and we're going to be learning tonight, starting tonight, what is considered one of the fan favorites of Sugyos in Sukkah. We're going to be talking about the mitzvah, the principle of osek b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah. When one is involved in one mitzvah, they are exempt from performing another mitzvah. This is a very fundamental principle. It comes up, of course, here in Sukkah we're about to see, but it's what you call a CAS concept. It's something that is good to know because its implications, it applies to our Kol HaTorah Kula. Okay. So we're on 25a, Chafei Amid Aleph. We're at the Mishnah there. So it should not be hard to locate. We're at the Mishnah. It's the only Mishnah on Chafei Amid Aleph. Shluchei mitzvah. You guys hear me, right? Okay, good. Shluchei mitzvah piturim min sukkah. Those who are shluchei mitzvah. Now, what makes somebody a shluchei mitzvah? So if you look at Rashi, of course, based on the Gemara, tells us mitzvah, those who are on their way to perform a mitzvah, such as could go to lilmo Torah, whether it be to go to learn Torah, you're heading to a shir to learn, or you are going to visit your Rebbe on Yantif. There's a mitzvah for someone to visit their Rebbe on Yantif, and also to redeem captives. So if you are on your way and you are involved in the process of getting these things done, you are considered to be osik b'mitzvah, and therefore you are pater min mitzvah. Okay, I want to just make sure that I'm going to be using that term a lot. That's the term of the night.
Rabbi, how about just regular mitzvot that have to be done with some regularity or on time?
Very good. So Phyllis, you're asking Tosas kasha. Tosas kasha, but more like Tosas inquiry, which we're going to get to soon. So you're ahead of the game, but let's just bring up Phyllis's question in the meantime. I don't know. What about wearing tefillin? Like, if I'm wearing tefillin, does that mean that, if someone comes and eats tzedakah, I don't give them tzedakah? Like, I don't have to do that? So we need some, obviously, right? Now it's the evening, but if it was a daytime, so I'm wearing tzitzis right now. If I'm being osik in the mitzvah, I'm wearing tzitzis, does that exempt me from doing everything else? Obviously, that doesn't make sense intuitively, but we're going to have to flesh out what the parameters are. So I think that's what you're getting to, right?
Yes. Well, the one, the
casual.
The example I was thinking about more was burying the dead.
Oh, we're going to talk about Avelos, actually. Mace Mitzvah comes up in the Gemara. So, all right, you're ahead of the game, Phyllis. So
also, is there a difference between Yantuf and not Yantuf and Chol? I mean, during Sukkot, but not Yantuf.
Yeah.
Chol.
Yeah. So the important thing is that even though we're talking about sukkahs as a mitzvah of eating in a sukkah because that's the mesachta we're in, but this principle, as we'll see shortly, is not limited to Hilchos Sukkah, right? So this is a good methodological question. Anytime you see a special rule come up, you have to ask yourself, like we did a shir, I think a while ago, we did a 10:30 shir on the sugya of istinus in halacha. Someone who is extremely uncomfortable is exempt from, is allowed to take a shower while they're in Shiva. So the question is this a localized heter unique to Hilchos Avelos, or is istinus an overarching principle, and this is just how it manifests in Hilchos Avelos? So osik mitzvah is not limited to Sukkah. It's actually an overarching Shas concept, and we'll see momentarily in the Gemara other applications of it. So we'll get there. Okay, so back into the Mishnah. Cholin u'mishamshei p'turim min sukkah. Those who are ill and those who are tending to the needs of the ill people are also exempt from the sukkah. And then finally, another din, which we'll get to in another time. Ochlin ushosin arai chutz l'sukkah. One is allowed. If you're having a sudas keva, you're having an established meal, that needs to be in the sukkah. But something which is not an established meal, you're just having a snack or a drink, you can have that out. You can have that outside the sukkah. Now, how do we delineate what is arai and what is keva? Well, that of course is worthy of its own discussion, and we will discuss that. Okay, so into the Gemara. Mina hanimili. Where do I know that there's this idea of osik b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah? The Tanu Rabbanan. So actually, just go back to the basics. Let's go to Shema. It says b'shiftecha veisecha. When are you supposed to say Shema? So either when you're dwelling in your house, prat the osik b'mitzvah, right? So Shema, it gives us all these different descriptions of when to say Shema, but it's not just there haphazardly. Of course, as we know, anytime the Torah gives us a little bit more what sounds like artistic or rhetorical flourish, it's not there just for descriptive purposes, but it's there to indicate something. So why did it say in the Torah that you should say Shema when you are dwelling in your house? This is the exclusion of someone who is not just sitting around, but someone who is involved in a mitzvah, that they would be exempt from saying Shema if somehow they were in conflict with each other. And what are the words when you are traveling along the way? Also in Shema, prat lechasen. This is the exclusion of a groom on his wedding night, that he is exempt from Shema. Mikan amru hakonis isabesula pater v'salmana chayv. So a groom, it's the first time he's getting married to this young woman, so then he is exempt. But if it's an almana, and I think the assumption here is that not just she's a widow, but it's not his first time getting married either, then he's chayiv because he, it's not as much pressure. It's not his first go. Now Rashi in Dibur Hamasklo Balechta V'Derech, you could take a look there. In the middle, he says, now why do we need to specifically mention a chassan being involved in the mitzvah? What mitzvah is he going to be involved in? The first mitzvah in the Torah, according to Sefer Chinuch, period for Rivya. God willing, either for the first time or at some point they will have children as a result of being together. So he's involved in a mitzvah. So I have a question. If I already learned from the B'shiftecha veisecha that if I'm involved in any mitzvah in the Torah, I am exempt from performing another one. So why did the Gemara need to specify a chassan being involved in period for Rivya? So Rashi explains, Havamina lo patar chassan ela toreach v'osam melechetz mitzvah b'yadayim o mahalech mitzvah. I would think, what's it mean, osik b'mitzvah? You are literally involved and exerting yourself to perform a mitzvah. But I would have thought to say that a chassan is not doing a lot of work on his wedding day. People are kind of just telling him where to go. Move here, say this, pick up this kerchief, designate those witnesses. And so he has this preoccupation on his mind, because assuming he wasn't sexually active beforehand, there's a lot running through his mind at the time, and he's preoccupied. And so the chiddush here is that even if he's not doing anything actively at the very moment to contribute to the mitzvah, the fact that he has preoccupation in his mind of performing the mitzvah, he is also exempt from saying Shema on the wedding night. Now, interestingly, I recall that this halacha is not necessarily kept today. Because what's the reason you wouldn't say Shema? Because Shema is not just something you mutter. Shema, at very least the first pasuk, arguably the first. Hello, my sweet. Oh, your pajamas, wonderful. I'm so proud of you. Oh, so a chassan. I'm just going to teach the shir, okay, my sweetie? Thank you. So a chassan on his wedding night, when he says Shema, he needs to have kavana, not just to fulfill him as a Shema, but he has to think about what it means. And so it's hard for him even to have kavana for the first paragraph of Shema. But the thing is, how many of us really have that much kavana nowadays? I remember this came up when we were doing a tshuva from Rav Henkin. The tshuva was on. Should I relocate? Sorry, so I'm just going to relocate rooms over here. That way I can give you all the attention that you well deserve. Take you on a field trip. Right? Whoever says our shir doesn't go on field trips, guys. Don't have to pay anything. All compliments of the soul, right? Everything's okay. All right. All right. Do you guys still hear me? Beautiful. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So the question is, a chassan, does he really have kavana any other night? How many of us have so much kavana? It's almost presumptuous to say, oh, on your wedding night, you're not going to have enough kavana, so you're pata from Shema. Well, it assumes that you have kavana every other night. It's like, I believe it's the Ramah. In theory, if one doesn't have kavana during the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, they have not fulfilled the mitzvah. But the halacha is that we don't repeat Shemona Esrei because we're so bad at having kavanah that if I didn't have kavanah the first time around, who's to say I'm going to have kavanah the second time around? So I believe halacha lamaisa that the chassan nowadays actually does say Shema on his wedding night. Okay, so but if you find yourself in that situation, guys, consult your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay. Continuing in the Gemara, my mashma. So how do we? The thing is, like, where do we see this idea in the pasuk? It's kind of weird. Where do you get that from the words ubalektecha v'derech? Where do you get that from the words b'shiftecha v'yisecha? So my mashma, amra fuda kiderech ma kiderech, because we're focusing on the word derech when you're on the way. Ma derech rishos av kol rishos la'afuke hai de b'mitzvah asa. So what's ubalektecha v'derech? It's a derech rishus, like when you're going on a trip, when you're traveling. That doesn't have it doesn't sound like you're involved in a mitzvah. It sounds like you're just going on a spazier. You're just taking a little bit of a stroll. So when you're strolling around, you should also make sure to say Shema, even when you're on the way. The Gemara says, do you assume like people just stroll around and gallivant with nothing in mind? Of course, we should assume the average person when they're walking, because they're walking to the base medrash. Maybe the pasuk when it says means even on your way to perform a mitzvah, you should still be reading the Shema. So then the response is imkain lemakra b'sheves uveleches my b'shiftecha ubelechtecha. So why does it say to you that in your dwelling and in your going? So the way to read it is beleches di dachu de mechayeves habeleches de mitzvah pitarta. So what it means to imply is that when you are going for your own belechtecha, for your own personal purposes, that's when you're obligated to say Shema. But when you're going not for your purposes, not just to go on a stroll, on a nice walk, but you're doing it because you're on your way to the base medrash to learn. So then, if you are not able to have kavana while you're walking, and that's your only chance to say Shema, somehow, if that's how it works out, then you are exempt from saying Shema. Ihachi, returning back to the case of the groom on his wedding night, who is exempt from saying Shema under these circumstances, afilu konis almananavi. Shouldn't it be the same matter? Because, well, if you are going to attempt to have children when you're marrying a widow, you're also involved in a mitzvah. So why aren't you exempt there? Why is there a distinction between a widow versus a first-time marriage? So the response is konesis of basula tarid, kones amanalo tarid. Okay, we read Rashi already, but Rashi, of course, got it from the Gemara, because when it's a first-time marriage, there's a lot of preoccupation. Again, assuming people were not sexually active beforehand, they got a lot of things on their mind to figure out. But if they had been before, such as in the case of a second marriage, there's not as much of that same first-time anxiety on their mind. That's why there's a distinction. But wait a minute, the Gemara says, but then that means, I can think of lots of scenarios in which someone is preoccupied. And if you were to respond, yeah, anytime you're preoccupied, you're exempt. I skipped it. Sorry. If your boat is sinking in the ship, in the sea, or for us who don't have yachts, or I'm just assuming, for myself who doesn't have a yacht. So if my car is on fire, if my car is getting destroyed, and the only thing I can think about is like, oh my gosh, I just lost my car. I just lost one of my most important assets, and I can't think about anything else. I should also be patur from Shema because my mind is preoccupied. Yet that's not the halacha. And the if you're going to say, maybe, you know what? Maybe if my car's set on fire, I am exempt from saying Shema because I'm preoccupied. No, but that's not true because that's not actually the halacha. But Amarav Abba Barzav, Amarav, Avil Chai V'chol Mitzvah Torah. Someone who is in Shiva is still chayiv in all mitzvahs of the Torah, min hatfilin she'nemer behem pe'er, except for we're talking about Aval on the first day of the burial. When there's the burial, they are exempt from wearing tefillin. They're not supposed to wear tefillin. So, but otherwise, an Avel is chayiv. Now, an Avel, even in theory, he's not supposed to be learning Torah, but it can be Torah related to Avelis. Right? You got the morning and halacha pamphlets. Like there's still some kind of Talmud Torah that one can do on a very cursory, limited level. So what's the answer? And this brings to the end of the first section. Hacha taratirda de mitzvah, hasam taratirda de rishtos. There's a difference between preoccupation with performing a mitzvah versus preoccupation with something which is not inherently religious. I may be preoccupied that my car got caught in a latest riot and was set on fire, but that's not called preoccupation of a mitzvah. Preoccupation of a mitzvah, such as performing pruvu, having children, working on that is considered, even if I'm not involved in the act right now, the preoccupation of a mitzvah is enough to exempt me, but not just any old preoccupation. That's what the Gemara concludes. Let me pause over there. Do we have any questions so far? Well, hopefully, at least, is a bit of a breath of fresh air. I mean, I think this is a little different, Toby, right? And then I don't get me wrong, I love Lavud and Dofen Akuma and all of our good friends about making machitzas and whatnot. But it's, admittedly for myself, I'm glad we got to switch things up a bit right now. Okay. Let's go a little further in the Gemara, right? We want to get on to the next Amud. And then we're going to look at what is one of the most famous Tosos on the Sukkah. Okay. Remember, what is the source for the principle? Again, I'm going to use this term a lot. Osig mitzvah, pater mitzvah. Someone who's involved in one mitzvah is exempt from then performing another mitzvah while they're still busy with the first one. That's osig mitzvah, pater mitzvah, key term of the night. So, osig mitzvah, pater mitzvah, mechanafka. Do we infer this very important Torah principle from the parsha of Shema? No. Another source for it. Titania. We learn from the following brisa. We learn from Pesach Sheni. Right, right. So the part is in the next day, but that means Pesach's not too far behind, which means Pesach Sheni. Okay, that was not meant to evoke any anxiety about Pesach not being too far ahead. Though I already did start reaching out to matzah places. Try to get ahead of the game. We learned from Pesach Sheni. Now, what mitzvah caused people to be tameh that they could not bring a carbon Pesach?
They were carrying Yosef's bones.
That's one of the opinions, but there's two others as well. So you got one of them, Phyllis.
Sure.
That's the most famous one. Who were these men that could not bring a carbon Pesach the first time around in Nisan? They were the ones, as you said, Phyllis, who were carrying the coffin of Yosef. Divrei Rav Yossi Haglili, and Divrei Phyllis as well. Rav Akiva Omer, Mishav El Tzavan HaYush Oskim Ben Nadav Avihu. Remember, after Nadav Ben Avihu, they go into the Kodesh HaKodashim, they bring the that offering before God that was not accepted. So then they die. So El Tzafan and Mishael, who I believe were Aaron's cousins, if I'm not mistaken, they're the ones who take him out. And because they were dealing with two corpses, they became Tamei Mace, and they were not able to bring the Carbon Pesach that year, or that month rather. So Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Im Nose Arono Shel Yosef Hayu Kvar Hayu Holchin Litaher. In both these cases, there was sufficient time for those who were bearing the bones of Yosef, because they had already camped for a while at that point. There's a big misnomer that we're always like, oh, why did it take like 40 years for the Jews to get all the way from Egypt to Israel? There's always this thing that goes around social media, like someone Google Maps how long it takes to walk from Egypt to Israel. Like, I don't get why it took them 40 years. Well, the answer is because they weren't walking for those 40 years straight. They were encamped in many places for a very long time. That's when they had time to set up the Mishkan, for instance. So there was enough time for those who were bearing the bones of Yosef to actually become tahor and be able to bring the Karban Pesach. And even Mishav al-Safan, it happened right at the beginning of Nisan when this occurred. So they also had enough time to become tahor. So rather, what is the third opinion? The third opinion is Ela oskin mitzvah hayu shechal shvish lehen yos erev Pesach. Rather, it's just about miscellaneous people who are, people died in the midbar. So there were people who were part of the Chevra Kadisha, or they were pallbearers, or whatever they were. And it happened to be that the final day, you have to wait until 7 days elapsed. The 7th day was Erev Pesach. Shenamar v'lo yachu la'asa Pesach b'yom hahu. B'yom hahu ein yichol la'asos halamach yichol la'asos. So they missed the opportunity to bring the Karban Pesach by literally 1 day, because you have to prepare the Karban Pesach on Erev Pesach. On Erev Pesach was the last day that they were still tamei from interacting with the corpse. So therefore, these miscellaneous people missed out on the mitzvah. Now, what's the point of all this? The point of this whole brisa is no matter whatever way you slice it, we see that there were people who knew that when they got involved in giving, final respects to the dead, and they took care of the deceased, they could easily calculate that, oh, Pesach is coming up in a few days. I'm not going to be able to bring a Karban Pesach. And nonetheless, they were instructed, and it was approved that they should be involved in the mitzvah of Mace Mitzvah, even at the expense of being able to perform the Karban Pesach. So why could this not just serve as our source for Osik Mitzvah of caring for the deceased? Patur min mitzvah, I'm exempt from having to account for the Karban Pesach. Why do I need to learn it from Shema? And really, the Gemara is about to tell us we need both sources. That's usually how it happens, because both sources teach us two unique dinim that I would not know without both of them combined. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look in the Gemara. Tricha. The I ashme'inan hasam mishum lo matta zman chiyuv de Pesach. So if I only had this brisa, the one we just learned, that we learned from Karban Pesach, well, I could say Osik mitzvah patur mitzvah just means, it wasn't that literally the day that they were supposed to be involved in the Karban Pesach, they took the Paschal lamb, they chucked it, and then they went and they dealt with the Mace Mitzvah. There was no mitzvah of Karban Pesach until Erev Pesach, but this was a number of days before the Pesach. So it's not as huge of a chiddush. It's not as strong if we only learn from the Karban Pesach. Whereas, but here we're literally at this moment, I'm chayiv to say Shema, and yet I'm putter anyway. Amalo, I would say maybe Osik Mitzvah Patur Mitzvah does not go that far. The tzricha, that's why I need Shema.
Yeah, you're hiding from me.
V'yash me'inan haka.
What?
V'yash me'inan haka. And if I only had this source right now, mishum deleka kares, because there's no kares associated. Even though saying Shema every day is very important, If I forget to say Shema, I'm a vatal naseh. I neglected to perform a positive mitzvah. What's unique about Korban Pesach is even though it's a positive mitzvah, right? Sefer Chinuch friends, we learned this a long time ago toward the beginning of our journeys. It actually, it's Korban Pesach and Bris Milah are both positive mitzvahs, but if one fails, if they neglect to perform them, they carry the punishment of kares, of divine excision. That's unique because usually neglecting to perform a mitzvah doesn't even get you malchus. But here, darshan it up because the bris and because Korban Pesach are so fundamental and important, whatever the reason is, therefore one gets kares if they don't do it. Now, so I would say if the only source for osik by mitzvah, pater, and mitzvah came from Shema, I would think, okay, we could set Shema aside if I'm involved in another mitzvah. But something which carries an Isser Kares with it, like Korban Pesach, aim low. I would say maybe not. So Tzricha. Amahasa, Ika Kares, aim low. So Tzricha. So therefore I need both. I need Shema to teach me, even if at the very moment both mitzvahs are here, I still do the first one. And then and then from Korban Pesach, I learned even if it carries a very heavy punishment of kares, you still are only involved in the first mitzvah, not in the second one. Okay? That brings us to the end of the Gemara we're doing tonight. I'm going to pause for any questions, and then I want to turn back to Chaf Hey Menalef to look at Tosfos. So any questions if you have? John?
If they knew in advance, if I understood you correctly, that the day of Korban Pesach, they're going to have the opportunity to prepare. But there's also the concept of joining other families for the Korban Pesach. So why couldn't they latch on to that?
You need to be tahor to partake in it.
I'm sorry?
You need to be tahor to partake in it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you can't, okay. So it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. So otherwise, right? You say otherwise, like you're saying, every Korban Pesach has a chabura, has a pre-designated group. So I believe the issue is, I think you need to be tahor to partake in it because it's a korban.
But they would have been tahor that day.
It was the last day. So I see what you're asking. You're saying is maybe I can't physically partake in it, but by that night, that's an interesting point. I guess maybe you need to be eligible at the time of it being brought to eat in it. It's a great question, Judd. That's what I would think off the top of my head, but you got me thinking on that one. I feel like I wonder. I think I see Toso Steve asking me Shum. Chaf Hey Mevei is possibly dealing with it, but I don't want to. I'm not gonna take 10 minutes to
deal with
read
this
through and parse it right now. But it's an excellent basically just to bring up Judd's question. Judd's question is, okay, I get I have to eat the Korban Pesach when I'm tahor, and if it's the last day, I should be able to eat the Korban Pesach. Yeah. You know what? I think I even see Rashi dealing with it. I think it's Rashi Shechal Shvi Shalem. Let's see. I got the Chazal Orta Lo Ishtur the Ksever Ein Shoftim Zorgan Al Tamei Shars become Makom Shamim. So the Mitzvah Sharin this one with Sans Shaviyah the happens aboutAlisha. Yeah. All right. I need to look into that point. I don't want to keep you guys waiting. Okay.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
No. But please do remind me. I want to actually want to investigate that. Okay. So my friends, turn back to Chaf Hey Menalef Shluchei Mitzvah. That's the second Tosus on the page. Again, I don't know if you might need to buy a separate article volume of Tosus if they translated it. But guess what, guys? You have me here to translate it. So if you want to follow along in Tosos first quotes Rashi. Okay, you guys found the Tosos? Shluchei Mitzvah, Chaf Hey Menalef, second one. Okay, so we mentioned those who are on their way to perform a mitzvah are exempt from Sukkah because it will take them time to set up camp and build a Sukkah, and that'll prevent them from whatever their goal is. So Tosos quotes Rashi again. We'll read it again just to remind us what Rashi says. Tosos actually quoting, generally when Tosos quotes Rashi, we're used to Tosos quoting Rashi so that they can disagree with Rashi. Here they're actually quoting Rashi and they're pretty much fine with what Rashi says. Holchei b'davar mitzvah, go limod Torah ulahag p'nei rabba litzos shvuyim p'tur min hasukkah. So someone who is going to learn Torah, to visit his Rebbe and Yontif, to free captives, is exempt from the sukkah. Fafilu b'shas chaniyaton, even when they are not walking, even when they are encamping, they do not have to trouble themselves to construct a sukkah. Kach pirush b'kuntras. So far, that's all Rashi. V'chein mashma. Now Tos is built on this. The Gemara, the Ka'amar, holchei l'davar mitzvah, peturim min hasukkah, bein bayom or bein balayla. The Gemara, as we'll see, says that those who are traveling to perform a mitzvah, they are exempt from sleeping in a sukkah, not just during the daytime when they're traveling, but even at nighttime. What's the implication? Umashma apa pishin holchin ela bayom, even though they only travel during the daytime, the azibi amama v'layla a few dvaros just not here, because you know what? If you were traveling day and night and you didn't have a second to rest, you'd be putter from sukkah, even if you were not traveling to perform a mitzvah. Even if you're going on a chol moed. See, this gets into a very interesting question, which is, how liberal can we be with the term mitzvah? I don't know. I guess enjoying chol moed is a mitzvah. So say, hey, I'm supposed to be a sort of someone. I go on a hike to Beer Mountain on chol moed. So how far are we willing to stretch the definition of mitzvah? And that's something, if we were doing an Ian share on this, I think that's something worth investigating for us. But we'll stick to the obvious examples. So if I'm just traveling for a non-mitzvah purpose, if I'm traveling nonstop day and night, I'm exempt. If I stop somewhere at night and I'm resting, if I'm not involved in traveling for a mitzvah, I do have to have a sukkah set up over there. Whereas if I'm traveling for a purpose of a mitzvah, I would even be exempt from a sukkah, even at nighttime when I'm not traveling. Okay, and where does Tosos get this from? Tiktani de Brisa. This comes up in a Brisa, which I believe is actually found in Moed Katan. V'od uvda drachis l'Rab Ravuna degano arax in the surah. This comes up later in the Gemara, I believe, in which they were going to visit their Rebbe. They're going to visit the Reish Galusa, and they encamped by a riverbank, and they did not set up a sukkah because they were on their way to perform a mitzvah. So they did not need to set up a sukkah when they were on their way. So if you ever don't want to be involved in mitzvahs, just plan a long trip to visit some rabbi in Australia, and you'll be exempt from mitzvahs. You're trying to figure out some loopholes and workarounds here. Okay, but then Tosa says, the tema in Yehulakaim Shnehem Amai Peturin. It's untenable to think that, if I'm doing one mitzvah, it means I have a carte blanche. I have permission not to do any other mitzvah now. Ta'atu adam sheyesh lo tzitzis bebigdo utfilah barosho mikmikdem rakach mishar mitzvahs. Do you think someone who's wearing tzitzis and tefillin now all of a sudden is exempt from fulfilling the rest of the mitzvahs in the Torah? That's ludicrous. Ubeperak ain't bein amudar, and Tosos infers this from a very this is where it gets a little bit convoluted here. I'll try my best to explain it. Gabe hamudar hana demaser lo avidaso ab alpi demahile pruta drav yosef. So the case basically is that where Reuven says takes a vow, I am not going to benefit from Shimon. But what do you know? Reuven finds Shimon's lost object. Now you would think there's no issue of Reuven returning the lost object to Shimon, because Reuven says I'm not going to benefit from Shimon. Here, Shimon's the beneficiary. He's getting a lost object back from Reuven. But Reuven benefits, because in theory, if a poor person were to show up while he is tending to that lost item, so then he would be exempt from the mitzvah of giving tzedakah at that point. So wait a minute, wouldn't we call that benefit? So the answer is mishum delo shchicha. Now here's where Tosos comes in, Now, if I were to suggest that every moment, I found someone's suitcase on the ground, and every moment that suitcase is in my house, well, I'm involved in the mitzvah of returning the lost object. I'm watching that object until the owner comes. So then I never have to give tzedakah if someone shows up because I'm already doing one mitzvah. I don't do the other mitzvah. If that were true, in Cain, shchichahin, and that would be considered a very common occurrence, and I would be benefiting from it. Rather, Tosas infers from this case that only when you are involved directly intending to that lost object are you exempt from other mitzvahs. Kugon. But now let's give an actual example. Okay, this talis needs to be laundered and stretched out and cared for every now and then. Let's sort or if you found a lost animal, you found someone's lost dog. So when you are feeding that dog, that's when you are exempt from other mitzvahs, not just when the dog is napping. So then it's uncommon at the very moment I'm putting the dog food in the bowl, all of a sudden someone's going to show up and ask for tzedakah. The tzarich lomar, the hachanami, coming back to the case of Sukkah, so even when I'm traveling to perform a mitzvah, if I'm able to eat in a sukkah and setting up a sukkah or planning my trip so that I stop at a hotel that has a sukkah along the way, if I'm able to do both, if I'm able to be mekayim shnehem, then you do both. According to Tosfos, only when it becomes a zero-sum game. When it's a zero-sum game, when you can only do one or the other, then you only have to do the first mitzvah. You don't have to do the second mitzvah. Now, the Ritva takes this one step further. The Ritva says that the rest of my svarim are back in the other room, so I'll just tell you what the Ritva says. The Ritva says it's not just simply a rishus. It's not just simply that you're exempt from performing the second mitzvah. It's that it's usher for you. It's forbidden to disengage from the first mitzvah in order to do the second mitzvah. You have a responsibility to perform the first mitzvah. If it's a zero-sum game and they are mutually exclusive, you can only do one at this time, you are chayiv to finish the mitzvah you're currently involved in before proceeding to take on a new mitzvah. Don't take on too many projects at the same time. That's what the Ritva says. Toby.
Is there no hierarchy of the mitzvahs? I mean, what if you're involved in a very minor mitzvah and then the second one is, like to bury the dead or to save a life or something? I mean, how
Toby asks a very important question, which is, are all mitzvahs created equal? Well, some are more equal than others, and that is true. If you're
and how do we determine that? Is that left up to us?
So if we remember, there was a Masechta we learned before this one. Guys, which Masechta did we learn before this one?
Megillah.
Very good. So at the beginning of Maseches Megillah, one of the first blot right there at the beginning, we have a discussion about how if I am learning Torah, I close my Gemara so I could hear Megillah. But the Gemara doesn't stop there. I don't remember the whole hierarchy on that, but there's like, what about teaching Torah publicly? Maybe that's qualitatively different than just learning by myself. And it had this whole hierarchy in there of which mitzvah supersedes the next one. Like, it's like one fish eats another fish. Like there's always a bigger fish. So yes, that is true. Toby mentions a very good point in this sugya. And in fact, so we saw this recently during our Monday night base medrash night. We are learning right now Hilchos Talmud Torah. I guess I'll make a push for it. And we looked at a Kehilas Yaakov, the Steipler Gaon. The Steipler asked the following question: how is it possible that this, I can just close my Gemara and go perform a different mitzvah if no one else can do it? So the answer, he says, it's not that Talmud Torah is like the lowest on the totem pole of mitzvahs. After all, we say Talmud Torah keneged kulam in Elul Dvarim. You have all these mitzvahs on one side and Talmud Torah is on the other side, weighing down the scale. It's that you're only chayiv to learn Torah when you have Zman Panui, when you have extra time. At very minimum, you have to say Shema in the morning, Shema in the evening. But any additional Torah you do, you're only chayiv in it when you have available time. But when there's another mitzvah, it's not the other mitzvah supersedes Talmud Torah. It's that when there's another mitzvah to do, you are not chayiv in Talmud Torah at that point. Now, as I said that time also, I appreciate the choir here because you guys all make time to learn Torah. Hence you're on right now, so you guys are amazing. But one, I'm speaking generally, needs to think to themselves, okay, and I'm speaking to myself as well, I have to be honest. Like, what is considered available time? Because I can always say to myself, well, and I try to make time for my family, right? Which I should probably go do soon. But I can always say to myself, well, how can I ever learn Torah? I could always be spending more time with my family. How can I ever learn Torah? I can always be, exercising, the more exercise I do will make me healthier. So it requires honesty and introspection, and I haven't quite figured that out myself. But I think the important thing is, this is right. Well, it's Erev Shabbos. We'll give a drasha, right? So the important thing is that we have those questions to begin with. We were talking about Minyan Initiative here in the community. So someone said to me, but I have family, so I have to take care of the kids, so I can't be at Minyan. I said, you know what? That's okay, as long as that's the cheshbon in your head, that I value Minyan and I value family. And many times I need to tend to my family and I'm not available for Minyan. That's an okay, we can talk about that, but that's like a legitimate thought process. But for many, it's that Minyan is not even on the radar as a value to begin with. So one needs to first have that discussion as a havamina. So that's the thing over here with Talmud Torah. It's like Talmud Torah needs to be a value on the radar to begin with for one to even begin to have honest introspection about what is considered open time for Talmud Torah. Anyway, as I said, I'm preaching to the choir here because you guys all made time to learn Torah tonight, and I'm very grateful for it. Wonderful learning together with all of you, and looking forward to continuing our adventures through Masechet Sukkah, God willing, next week. Wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you and good Shabbos.
Take care.
Good
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.